This week's game against the Minnesota Vikings will be a real test of the Chicago Bears' progress this season, with Brian Flores challenging Caleb Williams in some ways that some of the other more recent opponents haven't.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on social media all across the platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and of course, the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. And on the show today, we're going to break down where this Bears team will be tested and how we can look for progress from week 1 against the Vikings to now, really on both sides of the ball. We'll start with Brian Flores' defense and how the way he attacked Caleb Williams in week 1 might not be the same way he attacks Caleb Williams this time around, and what those differences might say about this Bears team's progress, and also just the way that Ben Johnson's offense adapts, what that will show us about where things are for this quarterback and these receivers being on the same page a bit more than they would have been in week 1. And same thing on the other side of the ball, where Dennis Allen's defense looked sharp for 2 or 3 quarters against the Vikings, but fell apart in the fourth quarter, and we've seen them struggle quite a bit since, but the defense has changed approaches quite a bit since week 1. So a lot has changed, and a lot to monitor how they approach it differently against the Vikings there too. And then we'll check in on the injury reports for both teams, having some key players that we'll need to keep an eye on that could really swing this matchup in either direction. But this game for me will be all about the Brian Flores versus Caleb Williams matchup here. I mean, we'll talk about J.J. McCarthy and some of the volatility of the Vikings offense that way, but like this is sort of like the strength on strength side. Bears offense, Vikings defense, and then it'll be a little bit more like weakness on weakness side with Vikings offense and Bears defense. It's a little bit of an oversimplification, but you kind of see where I'm coming from here, because Brian Flores is a little bit unpredictable in exactly how he's going to attack the Bears quarterback. The things he did in week 1 have not always been the things he's done all season, right? He doesn't go into these matchups with like a one-size-fits-all approach. Like, we know he likes to be aggressive and he likes to blitz, but like it's not the same type of blitzes, and it's not even the same like frequency of blitzes. You know, you look back to week 1 against the Bears, and they blitzed Caleb Williams on, it was about 40-ish% of his dropbacks in that game, which is a relatively high number compared to most teams. But then you look at like the Vikings in their last game before this against the Baltimore Ravens, they blitzed Lamar Jackson on like 75% of his plays, like twice as much as they had blitzed Caleb Williams. Like for Flores, there's a certain amount of like, we're going to show you blitz. You're not sure how often we're actually going to blitz, and we're going to try and confuse you at the line of scrimmage and bait you into certain things and not let you run the offense the way you really want to, because you can't know for sure how many pass rushers we're going to bring at you. And then on top of that, you can't know for sure what kind of coverage we're going to run behind it, because he's become a lot more of like a 2-deep zone type of blitzer, where they take away some of the deep stuff and they want you to kind of just throw a short underneath. But, you know, long ago, he used to be more of a man coverage blitzer, where they'll just line up man-to-man across the board and dare you to beat them 1-on-1, and they'll still kind of dabble in both. So that's what makes it a particular challenge for Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson. You can't just go in and say, okay, he's going to blitz us a lot, so how do we respond to the blitz? Because there's going to be maybe as much as 60% of the time he's not going to blitz you. And then if you're just, running plays to prepare for the blitz, but then they only rush 4, and all of a sudden they're able to cover you better with 7 guys, and the plays don't work the same way, all of a sudden you're into trouble there too. So that's part of that. That's sort of an oversimplification of what makes this challenging. But I think it's interesting to look back to week 1 and how Caleb did against the blitz at the time, because while he certainly wasn't completing a ton of his passes and getting a bunch of yards against the blitz. He was just 5 of 15 on pass attempts for 40 yards when blitzed against the Vikings. Like, it quote unquote worked for Minnesota, but his only touchdown pass in that game was against the blitz, and they also failed to sack him on any of those blitz plays. So like, it definitely was the more effective approach, because when they didn't blitz him, he was 16 of 20 for 170 yards. But like, both of their sacks came on those non-blitzed plays, but none of the touchdowns did either. And so it's kind of an interesting dynamic here where it's like, yes, blitzing him works in a lot of ways, but he is good at getting rid of the ball quickly. And I certainly think that's an area of growth we've seen from Caleb over time, where when opposing defenses are really sending the house against him, he's pretty good at saying, okay, this is an overload. Ball's got to come out now and quickly. Throw the check down, scramble, throw it away, whatever the quick hot route play is. He's pretty good at like recognizing when a big blitz is coming and getting rid of it. I think where more of the trouble comes is when it's like just like a 5-man rush. They send like one extra pass rusher, because then I think it's a combination of he has confidence that his offensive line can pick it up and that he can run the more normal play, and also that if a pass rusher does get through, he can make one guy miss. He can't make 3 guys miss. If they're rushing 7 or 8 and he's got a couple of guys bearing down on him, he knows he's kind of caught dead to rights there. He can't work his Houdini act and get out of the pocket there. But if it's one guy, he can put a move on him and extend a play and try and do something. And I think when we saw him do that against the Vikings, that's when you saw him not being on the same page as much with the receivers, because it was back in week 1, right? Because he was expecting Rome Odunze to be at a certain depth, and then he throws it a little short because he thought he was going to be shorter, or Olamide Zacchaeus, or the timing on little things was just off that early in the season. And since then, we've seen that aspect of the Bears offense improve, that when he extends these plays, he's been more decisive getting rid of the ball, more willing to just scramble and kind of take the easy free yards as opposed to trying to force something downfield, and just generally having better timing with receivers. They weren't always catching it against the Giants, but the balls were on time and where they needed to be a lot more consistently. And so that's kind of where I want to see that progress now from week 1 to now, in terms of like, when he needs to get rid of it quickly from the blitz, are they on the same page? Like when it's so pivotal there, when it's not necessarily in rhythm, but you're breaking some of the rules and playing a little bit freelance. Like, he hasn't had to do maybe as much of that as a passer in some recent games, but like how sharp they are in that regard will be big. And then just how consistently Ben Johnson gives him good answers to the blitz, right? Like, we see these splits between no blitz and blitz. You go from a 33% completion to an 80% completion is the difference there. Like, can you get that blitz completion percentage and yards per pass attempt a little bit higher there? Like, he's taking care of the football. He just hasn't been able to do much with it, or wasn't able to do much with it against the Vikings in that rate. But now you've had a lot more time to really open up the offense and add a bunch of new wrinkles. And now you can run the ball a heck of a lot better than you could back in week 1. So does that slow down the Vikings' ability to blitz and get after the quarterback? Does play action become a little bit more effective? Like, all of those things are going to be what I want to see progress from in this Bears offense, especially if the Vikings have some injuries with the pass rushers that we'll talk about a little bit later on in today's podcast. But I also want to look at the progress we've seen from Dennis Allen's defense. Like, not that they've all of a sudden become like a good group, but we've seen a lot of adjustments from him, and maybe in large part due to the injuries that the Bears have had in the secondary from week 1 until now. And now that the Vikings are getting Jordan Addison back they've had him back, but didn't have him in week 1, that makes the matchups pretty tricky. And we already know Justin Jefferson is going to be a real problem here with an injured Bears secondary. So we'll take a look at how some of the things have changed for Dennis Allen and some of the concerns I have when it comes to covering these Vikings wide receivers, and also getting pressure on J.J. McCarthy with a struggling Bears pass rush, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action. Because if you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections. And if you get them right, you win. It literally takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere PrizePicks operates. So maybe you want to pick Caleb Williams' passing yards and DeAndre Swift's rushing yards, or you can even go across sports and pick a Bulls player along with a Bears player, or any of your other favorite teams or favorite sports going on. You can get in on all of the action with PrizePicks. And if one of your players leaves early with an injury, PrizePicks has an injury reboot that can save your lineup from a loss. So download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. I'm more worried about this Chicago Bears defense being able to hold up against Kevin O'Connell, on the offense than I am about the Bears offense being able to get some stuff rolling. Like, I think Brian Flores and company are going to challenge Caleb and Bennett in some new ways. I think they're going to be able to respond okay. I'm a little bit more worried about a more banged up Bears defense now that can't get after the quarterback super well against Kevin O'Connell, even though J.J. McCarthy has struggled and has made mistakes. It hasn't been good. I still think we've seen this Bears defense struggle against quarterbacks that they should be better against because of the injuries and because of the inconsistency, right? I think about giving up 42 points to Joe Flacco, giving up 30 points to Tyler Huntley. Even Tyler Shuck at times for the Saints had a couple of drives that were way too easy in that game. So while I'm not so afraid of J.J. McCarthy as a quarterback right now, that doesn't mean this Vikings offense might not still be able to make big plays because you have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and Aaron Jones and TJ Hawkinson and all the different players there with an offensive coach that is good at scheming things up and making it as easy as possible on the quarterback. Like, this is an offense that it certainly looked really easy against the Bears in the fourth quarter of that first Vikings game, and it's looked too easy for a lot of offenses against them over the course of the year. And I think it largely comes down to the lack of pass rush, giving the opposing quarterbacks too much time. Then when they have a bunch of time, your really injured secondary is not going to just be able to hold up for 4, 5, 6 seconds of QB sitting in the pocket and waiting for somebody to get open. It's a pretty bad formula. Like, I think even if you're fully healthy with Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon, the pass rush might be holding you back a little bit, but then you add in Nashawn Wright out there and Stevenson and CJ Gardner-Johnson, and now Jaquan Brisker is injured. We'll talk about that coming up in a little bit. Like, there's a recipe here for trouble, especially if J.J. McCarthy can settle things down. But I'm really curious to see how Dennis Allen adjusts his approach from week one until now. Because when you look back at that first game, he really, from a coverage standpoint, tried to throw just about everything he could at J.J. McCarthy. It was a very balanced diet of the different types of coverage schemes they could throw at him. They played a little bit of cover 1 and a little bit of cover 2 and a little bit of cover 3 and a little bit of cover 4 and a little bit of cover 6 and a little bit of 2-man. It was, if you're trying to split up the pie, it was close to even, not exactly even, but everything was between 15 and 20% of each coverage they were running. I think it was hey, nothing predictable. Show them a bunch of different stuff on the back end and see if we can kind of confuse them there. And they baited him into a Nashawn Wright pick 6. That certainly worked in that regard. But I also think we saw times when, especially your cornerbacks weren't always sharp on receivers. And not that Justin Jefferson ate you alive by any means, but they were able to get a few things going in the passing game. Jefferson has 4 catches for 44 yards. Jalen Naylor has a 28-yard catch in that game. It wasn't a lights out passing performance, but from them by any means. But they got 2 touchdowns through the air, and they were able to get some decent chunks that they were looking for there. And since then, I should say this too. Also at the time, they really didn't blitz J.J. McCarthy much at all. They showed blitz a bunch, but only blitzed him 5 out of 25 times. That's 1/5, 20% of the time they blitzed him. Most of the game, they weren't really coming after J.J. McCarthy, and he could sit in a clean pocket a decent amount and move the ball through the air pretty well. He wasn't pressured on the pick 6 either. He just was stepped up and threw it and stared it down and didn't put it in a great spot. But that's not necessarily been the approach that Dennis Allen has taken since then. He has stepped up blitzing certainly a lot more than we saw against the Vikings. He's not going over the top in terms of blitz, but like is getting more aggressive, understanding that he's not getting enough of a pass rush with just a 4-man rush right now with your defensive line. But also I think he has, I don't want to say simplified things from a coverage standpoint, but like has narrowed in a focus and said, okay, there's some things we do, from his perspective, like some things his cornerbacks, the Bears defense does better than others, and maybe they should focus on, doing a couple of coverages really well and mixing those up as opposed to like trying to do a little bit of everything and not doing any of it particularly well. Like I think one of the big things you've seen in recent weeks is a bigger spike in, cover 3 zone, right? Single deep safety, so you can bring Jaquan Brisker or sometimes Byard up in the box, but still zone coverage, so you're not leaving your cornerbacks totally on an island, and certainly you have more help working over the middle of the field. And that just wasn't something they did a ton of week 1 against the Vikings. I think that's the coverage that you see the starkest contrast to. Back in week 1, they ran cover 3 about 14% of the time against Minnesota. And through the first 4 games, they didn't really run much of it. But since the bye week, they're up over 50% for a few games. Against the Giants, it was 44%. So you've like more than tripled your rate of cover 3. And along that same lines, like the Bears have run less and less man coverage over the time. They had a decent amount of man coverage against the Vikings, between a couple cover 0 blitzes when they did blitz, but then some cover 1 and some 2-man, made up close to, it was something like 50% of their total coverage snaps in that game, and it's been much less. It's 20 to 30% at most the last few games in terms of man coverage. So they've been more willing to kind of sit back in zone, blitz out of zone, and go more single deep coverages than some of the 2 deep coverages they were doing earlier in the season, knowing that does sometimes put your cornerbacks on a little bit more of an island, but it's kind of a trade-off there. And that's what I'm curious to see how they approach this when it's Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison on the other side. Because I think over the last few weeks, outside of the Bengals game, which their coverage splits were very, very different for the Bengals game than they were for Commanders, Saints, Ravens, or Giants, opposing offenses haven't had these sort of elite dynamic receivers. Like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins against the Bengals, yes. But the Giants, they didn't have Malik Neighbors. They weren't really threatening you with big-time receivers. The Ravens have Zay Flowers, but he kind of plays more over the slot and over the middle, so they didn't need to really back guys off deep. And the Saints with Olave and Shaheed and stuff, they weren't really worried about them beating you deep. The Commanders didn't have Terry McLaurin. Like the Bears have been able to say, okay, we're not worried about your wide receivers. Let's go single deep. Let's load up the box a little bit more. We'll leave our cornerbacks a little bit more on an island, and we'll get beat sometimes, but we can live with that. That's not necessarily the same strategy you use against Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Like they did a lot more 2 deep coverages against Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. And so do you go back to that knowing that when you've gone to more of those 2 deep coverages, you gave up a bunch of points to the Bengals and obviously a bunch of points to the Lions and lost to the Vikings in week 1 when you did it. Like it hasn't necessarily worked super, super well. But your alternative is leaving Nashawn Wright and Tyreek Stevenson in one-on-one coverage all the way down the field all the time with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Like, pick your poison here, right? And that's what I'm most fascinated to see how Dennis Allen approaches this, because I don't think there's a clear and obvious solution or answer there, especially when you're dealing with key injuries on your defense up the middle there at linebacker and at safety, where you could be missing a couple of starters. That makes this equation that much more difficult to figure out. So we'll take a look at how the Bears and Vikings injury reports will shape Sunday's matchup next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Gametime. The NFL season is in full swing, and there's nothing better than being in the stadium, surrounded by fans and cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between queues and login screens and prices jumping up at checkout. It's really frustrating, but that's why I use Gametime. I've got the app on my phone because it gives the advantage back to the fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee, where you'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. My favorite part is the all-in pricing, where all the fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I've used Gametime to get tickets to Bears games, to basketball games, to concerts. I just bought tickets to see Toto in the Gametime app. comedy shows, theater events, you name it. They've got it all in Gametime. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. This Bears injury report is going to be a real factor here. And obviously, injuries are a real factor every single week. But I think particularly in this matchup, there's a few spots on both sides that are really going to be pivotal in this one. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bears your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. That's why we get to bring you daily Bears updates here and keep tabs on injury reports like this late in the week to make sure that you're up to date with everything you need to know going into Sunday's matchup. And so for Chicago, right away, you get improvement from Wednesday to Thursday where a bunch of guys, Ben Johnson's kind of making this a habit every week where like a bunch of guys miss practice on Wednesday and you're like, oh no. And then by Thursday, most of them return and are full participants or sometimes limited, but like they're good to go Friday. And he just kind of is a little bit cautious by giving them that first sort of day off to bring a little bit extra recovery. And like Thursday's the day when you're like, okay, guys missed 2 days of practice. Now this one might be serious. And you look at the Bears injury report for Thursday, and the good news is that there's really only 2 guys that jump out at you as big concerns. Despite, DJ Moore was limited, Rome Odunze was limited. Like, yeah, you want to keep an eye on those. And Joe Thuney missed practice, but was for rest day for a veteran, not an injury thing. So he's fine. But it is safety Jaquan Brisker and linebacker TJ Edwards. Edwards, of course, missed this past game against the New York Giants, so not as huge of a surprise that he's still injured and still not practicing. But then Brisker dealing with a back injury, not practicing either day, that also becomes a big factor here for what we were just talking about, where it's like, okay, 2 deep safeties or single deep? Are you giving more help for your corners or less? And I think the level of trust and faith I have in Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard being those 2 deep safeties to give you help over the top is a bit higher than I trust, Elijah Hicks or Jonathan Owens filling into that other safety spot next to Kevin Byard. But also alternatively, like, who's the one I want in the box more? Well, it's Jaquan Brisker also. Like, I can kind of see it both ways where it's like, well, if Elijah Hicks is going to play, I guess you would rather have him deep than him playing up in the box because he's a little bit more of a free safety type of body, but I don't necessarily trust him to always be in the right place on the back end because he hasn't been able to do that consistently in his career. But then you throw in that, TJ Edwards may be out again, and Noah Sewell has just been bad, consistently bad, all season in pass coverage. He's better in the running game, but still misses a minimum of 1 tackle per game and usually 2 or 3 and leads the Chicago Bears in missed tackles this season. Like, Noah Sewell has been a liability in replacement for TJ Edwards or even Tremaine Edmonds when he's been out this season. And so, okay, then are you more inclined to go with more single deep safety coverages so you can have the second safety come down in the box to help buffer the Noah Sewell issues in coverage, right? It's another, like, pick your poison. Do you want to be vulnerable at corner? Do you want to be vulnerable at linebacker? Or do you want to be vulnerable with your deep safety? Like, you can only apply help in so many places all at once, and it feels like the Bears are going to have some sort of weakness on every given snap that a coach like Kevin O'Connell should be able to take advantage of, right? The bigger question is, can J.J. McCarthy take advantage of it? And that's going to be the difference for the Bears in this game, right? Like, can they get a mistake or 2 from McCarthy that leads to a turnover or 2 that creates some stops for this Bears defense that otherwise, most drives end in points or turnovers against this Bears team. They haven't forced an inordinate amount of punts this season. And so they're going to need 1 or 2 from J.J. McCarthy to kind of lift them up and make up for where those deficiencies are. That, like, Justin Jefferson is going to get open and make some plays, and Jordan Addison is going to get open and make some plays, and TJ Hawkinson is going to get open and make some plays. But, like, can you withstand 50 yards plus from each of them if you get 2 turnovers that end 2 drives? And if you end a couple of drives with field goals instead of touchdowns and then add a couple turnovers, like, can you get to another 25-24 type of victory, against the Vikings. Or, the last Vikings game was 27-24 Vikings. Like, can you get to that, but sort of in the reverse there? Because they did it for 3 quarters against them in the first game, but then absolutely fell apart in the fourth quarter. And then on the other side, for Minnesota, you're looking at injuries to their pass rushers and also one of their offensive tackles that really stand out in their injury report. Jonathan Grenard, the edge rusher who was really causing some havoc for Caleb Williams with a bunch of pressures in that first game. He has not practiced neither Wednesday nor Thursday. So if he's out, that can be a big difference. They still have, the long-haired Andrew Van Ginkel. He's been limited with a neck injury, but he's been playing. I think he, in theory, should be good to go. So, but taking Grenard out of the process could really be a big difference for someone like Theo Bennett at left tackle, who has certainly struggled, hasn't necessarily derailed your entire offense, but has something that can be a liability at times. So the more help you can get there as well. But then kind of a surprise for the Vikings on Thursday when left tackle Christian Darrisaw goes from a full participant on Wednesday to DNP on Thursday. That's a little bit hard to. I don't have a good read on what's going on there. Like if it's just kind of his knee was sore, so he's taking a day off, but he'll be fine for the game, or whether oh no, this is something serious that's kind of coming up now, and all of a sudden could the Vikings be with their backup left tackle? I mean, that could be an absolute difference maker in this game for somebody like Montez Sweat, and for a Bears pass rush that has really struggled. The Vikings are on a backup center right now, and Blake Brandel, and their right guard Will Freeze hasn't been everything they had hoped he would be in free agency. And so then if you have a backup left tackle like Justin Schooley in there, all of a sudden, can you get a little bit more of a pass rush? Can you get J.J. McCarthy a little bit more uncomfortable? Maybe you don't need to then blitz as much, and then you can sit back in coverage a little bit more, right? There's so many of these ripple effects for both of these defenses, or I guess, and offenses for these injuries that I think are really going to go a long way towards shaping this matchup. It's why, I've had a lot of trouble trying to predict or give a definitive call on who's going to win this game, because, I think these two teams are very close, and these injuries are at pretty key spots. I mean, ultimately, I think J.J. McCarthy is a huge wild card here, and if he plays really poorly, the Bears will win. If he puts it together in some of the ways he did the first time against this team, then the Vikings will win. If the Bears if it's just Brisker and Edwards, maybe you can get by, but if anybody else's pops up on Friday's injury report and is questionable or misses the game, that could be a big swing. Or if Grenard plays for the Vikings, that could be absolutely a big swing, going from them having a dominating, terrorizing pass rush to something that maybe the Bears can withstand a little bit better. I've said all week, I still lean Vikings victory just because we saw the Vikings beat the Lions 2 weeks ago, and we've seen the Vikings beat the Bears this season. So Chicago to me still has to prove they can win one of these divisional games. So far, under Ben Johnson in this regime, they just have to earn that benefit of the doubt, even though I think they should be able to beat the Vikings. But they were trailing the Giants by 10 points in the fourth quarter last week. They almost blew it to Joe Flacco and the Cincinnati Bengals the week before, and they lost to Tyler Huntley and the Baltimore Ravens before that. The last 3 games have not necessarily been huge confidence builders. And so even though the Vikings are on the downward swing right now and the Bears are sort of on the upward swing, I just need to see it happen before I can fully trust it. And I just slightly lean Bears loss here, but I won't be surprised at all if the Bears do find a way to win this game. And whether they win, lose, or heaven forbid a tie, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're looking for a second listen today, you can always check out Locked On Vikings with Luke Braun to get more intel on what's going on with the Bears' opponent this week. Or you can check out the Locked On podcasts for any of your other favorite teams in the NBA, NHL, MLB, or college sports. We've got you covered all across the country. So go check out another Locked On podcast. Come on back on Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.